On September 10, 2025, one of the most well-known conservative speakers, Charlie Kirk, was assassinated. Sadly, this is far from the first political assassination in U.S. history. In this video, I want to revisit some of the most infamous killings of political figures that have taken place in America. Abraham Lincoln went down in history as one of the greatest presidents of the United States, the man who managed to preserve the Union during the Civil War and bring an end to slavery. His path to power was far from easy. Born into poverty, self-educated, a lawyer and politician from Illinois, he won the hearts of ordinary Americans with his eloquence, and in 1861 he became the 16th president at a time when the country was being torn apart by the conflict between North and South. It fell to him to lead the nation through the bloodiest war in its history. And while I don't think he was as flawless and noble as modern propaganda often depicts him, denying his contribution to American history would be foolish. The Union's victory in 1865 and the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which permanently abolished slavery, made Lincoln a symbol of a new America. But this also earned him the hatred of many Southerners. One of them, actor John Wilkes Booth, believed that killing the president would restore the South's honor. On April 14, 1865, just days after the Confederate surrender, Lincoln attended a performance at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. While he sat in the presidential box with his wife and friends, Booth entered and shot him in the head. The next morning, the 16th president was dead, the first U.S. president to be assassinated. Lincoln's death shocked the nation. Tens of thousands filled the streets to mourn him. Booth was hunted down and killed days later, but that did not ease the grief. For many, Lincoln became a martyr who gave his life for the unity of the country. His assassination showed that even in victory, America remained divided and reconciliation would be a long road. Yet Lincoln's image became a cornerstone of American national memory. James Abram Garfield, the 20th president, served in office for only a few months. Born into poverty, he rose through talent and determination to become a professor, a Civil War general, and an influential congressman. A Republican, he unexpectedly won the presidency in 1881, promising reform. Garfield sought to root out corruption in federal appointments and strengthen executive power. This earned him enemies among those who expected patronage jobs. That summer, Charles Guiteau, a disgruntled lawyer who believed Garfield owed him a diplomatic post, decided the president's death would save the republic. On July 2, 1881, at a Washington, D.C. train station, Guiteau shot Garfield. The president survived the initial attack, but poor medical treatment and infection led to his death on September 19, 1881. His assassination plunged the nation into mourning and became the catalyst for civil service reform. The Pendleton Act, passed soon after, began dismantling the spoils system and professionalizing government service. Garfield's life ended too soon, but his death accelerated America's fight against corruption. William McKinley, the 25th president, embodied the era of rapid industrial growth and America's rising global power. Elected in 1897, he oversaw the Spanish-American War, which gave the U.S. control over Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Re-elected in 1900, McKinley was widely popular, but his expansionist policies and the era's growing inequality fueled rage among radicals. On September 6, 1901, during the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, anarchist Leon Czolgosz approached McKinley at a public reception and shot him twice. Initially, doctors thought he would recover, but infections set in. McKinley died on September 14th, and Vice President Theodore Roosevelt assumed the presidency. The killing marked the violent end of one era and the start of another. Czolgosz was executed in the electric chair weeks later, but his act became one of the most infamous political crimes in American history. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th president, symbolized youth, energy, and hope. Elected in 1960, he faced the most dangerous years of the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the early Vietnam conflict, and the space race. At home, he was a charismatic supporter of civil rights. On November 22, 1963, during a campaign trip to Dallas, Texas, Kennedy rode in an open limousine with his wife, Jacqueline, when shots rang out. A bullet struck his head, and he died within minutes. Former Marine Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested but killed days later by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. Kennedy's assassination shocked the entire world. It remains one of America's greatest mysteries, spawning endless conspiracy theories about who was truly behind the killing. For millions, JFK became a myth, the young leader whose promise of a new frontier was cut short by tragedy. Robert F. Kennedy, John's younger brother, was a rising star in American politics. As Attorney General, he battled organized crime and fought for civil rights. By 1968, he was a senator and Democratic presidential candidate, appealing to a nation weary of Vietnam and racial conflict. On June 5, 1968, after winning the California primary, Robert addressed his supporters in Los Angeles. While walking through the Ambassador Hotel's kitchen, he was shot multiple times by Palestinian immigrant Sirhan Sirhan. He died the following day. For many, his death was the final blow to the hopes of the 1960s. Robert Kennedy was seen as a unifier, a man who could bridge divides. His murder deepened national despair and left Americans asking what might have been. Martin Luther King Jr. became the face of the African-American civil rights movement. His steady and powerful voice, heard in the famous 1963 speech, "I Have a Dream," made him a symbol of nonviolent resistance against racial discrimination. He inspired millions and succeeded in achieving real change, the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Yet his activism also stirred deep hatred among segregationists and radicals who believed he threatened the very foundations of America. On April 4, 1968, King was in Memphis to support striking sanitation workers. That evening, as he stepped onto the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, a shot rang out. The bullet struck him dead. The assassin was identified as James Earl Ray, a fugitive criminal who was later arrested in London. For many, King became a martyr for equality, a man who proved that one could fight for their rights without resorting to violence. At the same time, however, some of his supporters saw his death in the opposite light. Many came to believe that his assassination was undeniable proof that violence was a necessary tool in the struggle for rights and justice. In the wake of his killing, massive protests swept across America, marked by riots, clashes with police, and widespread looting. Malcolm X was one of the most striking and controversial figures in the history of the African-American struggle for equality. He was born in 1925 in Nebraska to a poor family. Malcolm's youth was marked by poverty, and he became involved in crime at an early age, which eventually led to a prison sentence. It was in prison that he encountered the teachings of the Nation of Islam, a religious and political movement that promoted black nationalism and the separation of African Americans from white society. After his release, Malcolm became one of the movement's most gifted orators and leaders. His speeches were sharp, radical, and uncompromising. He rejected Martin Luther King's vision of integration with whites and instead called for an independent path for African Americans. As history shows, his ideas resonated deeply and became influential among many black activists and communities. By the early 1960s, Malcolm had become a national figure, but growing tensions emerged between him and the leader of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad. In 1964, Malcolm left the organization and undertook a pilgrimage to Mecca, where he experienced a profound spiritual transformation. There he saw Muslims of all races worshiping together, which broadened his worldview. He began advocating for a more universal solidarity and eased his stance on strict racial separation, though he never fully renounced the possibility of violence in the struggle for justice. Returning to the United States, he founded his own movement and continued to speak out passionately against racism, colonialism, and oppression. On February 21, 1965, in New York City, while Malcolm X was addressing his supporters at the Audubon Ballroom, several gunmen opened fire. He was killed instantly, struck by more than 10 bullets. The assassins were members of the Nation of Islam, a result of his bitter break and growing conflict with the group. Malcolm X's death shocked America. To some, he was a symbol of hatred and extremism. To others, he was a fearless fighter for freedom who dared to speak the hard truth about racial inequality and oppression. His ideas lived on, and he became a cultural icon whose influence shaped the Black freedom movement, American culture, and the global understanding of minority rights. Harvey Milk made history as the first openly gay man elected to significant public office in the United States. Born in 1930 in New York City to a Jewish family, he lived much of his early life in an entirely conventional way, serving in the Navy, working as a teacher, and running a small business. Only in adulthood did he fully embrace his identity and relocate to San Francisco, which in the 1970s was becoming the capital of the gay rights movement. Milk quickly found himself at the center of political and civic life. His charisma, energy, and ability to speak in simple words about complex issues won him support across a broad spectrum of society, not only among gays and lesbians, but also among working-class communities, ethnic minorities, and others who faced discrimination. In 1977, he was elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, a local legislative body. It was a true breakthrough. For the first time in American history, an openly gay man had secured such a position. But Milk's career was cut tragically short. On November 27, 1978, former city supervisor Dan White, who had resigned his position and then unsuccessfully tried to reclaim it, entered San Francisco City Hall with a revolver. He first shot and killed Mayor George Moscone, then walked into Harvey Milk's office and fired 5 shots. Milk was just 48 years old. The motives for the murder remain debated. Officially, White acted out of personal resentment. He believed Moscone and Milk had blocked his reinstatement to the board. Yet many saw his act as fueled not only by vengeance, but also by political and ideological hatred. White was a conservative Catholic who openly despised the new liberation movement that Milk represented. The trial of Dan White became one of the most infamous episodes in American legal history. His defense convinced the jury that he had been in a state of mental crisis, even citing the so-called Twinkie defense, arguing that his heavy consumption of sugary junk food was a symptom of depression. As a result, White was not convicted of first-degree murder, but instead of voluntary manslaughter. He received a minimal sentence of 7 years and served only 5. The verdict sparked outrage and massive protests. In San Francisco, riots broke out that became known as the White Night Riots. For thousands, especially within the LGBT community, the verdict symbolized that the system was unwilling to protect their rights and lives. Over time, Harvey Milk's legacy only grew stronger. He became an icon of the struggle for equality. Streets and schools were named after him. Films and books told his story. Harvey Milk died as a victim of hatred and injustice, but his death transformed him into a symbol. He became not just a politician from San Francisco, but a voice for millions who before him had little chance of being heard. After the recent assassination of Charlie Kirk, social media was filled with videos of radical liberals openly celebrating his death. I want to remind those people that at the core of classical liberalism lies tolerance, the understanding that people are different and have the right to hold different views. No one, regardless of their beliefs, deserves death. Never forget that. Rest in peace, Charlie.